Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. There's a lot of stuff today, and it's kind of a wide variety of things, so I'm going to kind of get started as soon as possible. She says, wasting time. But I did want to say that I have picked up my copy of Bloodlust and Bonnets, which is the graphic novel by the artist who does the background Slytherin comics. I'm sure many of you have appreciated those comics, have seen them. They are brilliant. Her sense of humor is great. I'm not really that far in yet, but it's basically just as cute as those comics are and just as irreverent. So yeah, Bloodlust and Bonnets. Also very into the concept. Love it. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to do was talk about Big Little Lies, which was this month's S.P.E.L.L. book of the month. And I also wanted to talk about it sort of as a continuation of Three Women, Big Little Lies, which is this month, Three Women, which is last month. So one of the big kind of controversial things we had with Three Women is there were a lot of people that kind of expressed that they wanted to hear like the men's side of the story, she says skeptically. And I addressed that in our discussion, so if you want to hear more about that, it's there. But I have a little bit more tools at my disposal to talk about why I think Three Women was important by referring to some scenes in Big Little Lies. So let me first be clear that Big Little Lies is like the majority of it is a comedy. I would call it a comedic domestic thriller, which is kind of a lot of qualifying words. But just take my word for it. It's very good, very entertaining, kind of a quick, easy read, even though it covers a lot of like really dense, difficult topics. But I wanted to focus on two scenes in particular. So first, to read you this brief scene from Three Women, which is actually from the conclusion. So the author, Lisa Taddeo, does not really go into detail about herself. She only reflects on her relationship with her mother. So she opens with a story about her mother, and then she closes with it and kind of reflects on her mother's life. And these are her mother's like almost dying words. Like not, I don't think exactly her dying words, but her mother is dying and this is what she has to say. "Don't let them see you happy," she whispered. "Who?" "Everyone," she said wearily, as though I had already missed the point. She added, "Other women, mostly." "I thought it was the other way around," I said. "Don't let the bastards get you down." "That's wrong. They can see you down. They should see you down. If they see you're happy, they'll try to destroy you." So now there's a section in Big Little Lies where Celeste, who is very beautiful, very wealthy, kind of everything that every woman wants to be, gives this little anecdote. Once when she'd been at uni, she'd been in a great mood, and she bounced into her tutorial and sat next to a girl called Linda. "Morning," she'd said. An expression of comical dismay crossed Linda's face. "Oh, Celeste," she'd moaned, "I just can't handle you today. Not when I'm feeling like shit and you waltz in here looking like, you know, like that." She waved her hand at Celeste's face, as if at something disgusting. The girls around them had exploded with joyous laughter, as if something hilarious and subversive had finally been said out loud. They laughed and laughed, and Celeste had smiled stiffly, idiotically, because how could you possibly respond to that? It felt like a slap, but she had to respond to it like it was a compliment. You had to be grateful. "Don't ever look too happy," she told herself. "It's aggravating." So one of the things I thought was so important about Three Women is that it really addresses what happens when we don't allow each other to want, when we kind of don't want to see each other happy, or we find it threatening when there are women who are happy, or who appear from the outset to be happy. So one of the ironic things about Celeste is that she is a victim of domestic violence, and she does not reveal this to anybody in her life because she learns, you know, from just that little backstory, she learns that nobody really wants to know what your life is actually like. But part of what makes Big Little Lies more rewarding in a sense than Three Women basically describe the scenarios of their lives. It feels lonely, it's intimate in a dark way. You see their unhappiness and you feel it yourself, because that is one of Taddeo's skills, is that she makes their stories feel real. But a lot of people don't like that sense of unhappiness, and that it doesn't end in any productive way, which you can do in fiction. So in Big Little Lies, there's a scene at the end where one of the characters, Madeline, is reflecting on what happened. And I'm not going to spoil it exactly, but I'm going to read this part, which is, Maybe it was actually an unspoken instant agreement between the four women on the balcony. No woman should pay for the accidental death of that particular man. Maybe it was an involuntary, atavistic response to thousands of years of violence against women. Maybe it was for every assault, every brutal backhanded slap, every other man that had come before this one. So I think that's kind of what Three Women is trying to accomplish, that it doesn't necessarily do to some people. It did for me. To some people, they're having sort of I don't want to say more difficult time, but some people are getting something different out of Three Women. What I got out of it was that it's kind of this call for us to make this same conclusion Madeline does, that in little ways, we've all been the subject of abuse is a tough word, and so is oppression, but it's kind of that concept of we are not free to express our desires. We're not free to want, to need. Someone said it very well, and I think they were anonymous, which is unfortunate that I can't credit them with this. But when I first recommended The Crane Wife, someone said something about how it's become socially acceptable that in order to be a cool girl, you have to not need anything. But that's kind of crazy. Actually, just on a personal note, I just found out that a guy that I was very hung up on when I was in college, I'm sure I've told this story before, has recently got engaged. And one of the things that he taught me, or just his being in my life, is that while I was going through this process of like trying to be valuable to him, that was how I taught myself to need less. I taught myself to not really need him to respond to my messages, or I didn't really need him to be committed to me. I just told myself it would be okay to have these little morsels of his affection, to have little pieces of his attention. If he wanted me sometimes and not others, I could make that okay. I could make it work. And now, looking back at that relationship and how lucky I am that I escaped that not being my constant go-to feeling. I think I know a lot of women who feel like that's normal, that in a relationship, sometimes the guy gives you what he wants and sometimes he doesn't, and that's just what you settle for. Don't settle for that. But yeah, I'm just kind of sick to death of the idea that we're not supposed to need things. Not from each other, not from our significant others. It's kind of wild that that's really what we've taught ourselves. We allow ourselves to be kept down by the concept that we shouldn't need anything, that we are loved because we don't need anything. Just don't let that be the thing that you internalize. Sorry to tell you what to do on this fine morning, but don't be afraid to need things. Because honestly, I think that when anyone really loves you, they will give it to you. So, and it's not going to prevent someone from loving you. Needing something from someone, from your partner, is not going to drive them away. If it does, they were never really there in the first place. So yeah, that's kind of a whole bunch of emotions. I'm having a lot of thoughts. I'm gonna come back to some of them, but anyway, let's move on. I still hate my hair, but I'm trying to live with it. I was going to try and take a break from this, but turns out I can't. So someone sent me an ask that said, a married man flirted with me yesterday and I feel exceptionally guilty over the whole thing, even though I did not flirt back. But gosh, why do women feel guilty over things that we aren't even in the wrong about? Like, it's not even my fault and I did nothing wrong in this situation, but I still feel bad. Yeah, this is totally the thing. I've made jokes before about how when the women in my boxing class, when we spar against each other, every time we hit each other, we apologize. The boys never apologize to each other. They don't apologize to us. It's just us apologizing to each other and to them, that the thing that we were supposed to do, hit someone in the face, is something we feel we need to apologize for. I'm taking a very strange route with my response to this, but you're just gonna have to follow my train of thought. So I've been reading this, London's Sinful Secret. It is about the body history and very public passions of London's Georgian age, because I've been writing a lot of stuff from the Georgian era. I've been doing a lot of research in this time period because I would like to write a historical romance from this time period, so I'm doing a lot of practice as a piece of writing advice. Sometimes if you want to take on a big project, it's easier if you address the minutia of something early on. So like, how Lady Vengeance takes her tea. I've said it in the Georgian era so that I don't have to do, when I'm writing books afterwards, I don't have to constantly check to remember what is this article of clothing called, what is this room in this house called, how would the house be set up, what's the architecture like. So it's easier for me to start by, okay, let's do it, because I still have to blend the Harry Potter world with the Georgian world. So this is kind of like a stepping stone of how could I play with this world in the future. So doing a lot of research about the Georgian age specifically, because the Georgian age, which is George the First, George the Second, and George the Third, starts in the early 1700s, and which is just after, well, part of, but more, further along in the Age of Exploration, which is a huge time period for the world, for England specifically, and especially the idea that a lot of people in England were about to start going to the New World. New England, and the South. Okay, whatever. To the United States. What would become the United States? You get it. So the reason I picked the Georgian era is, for one thing, Parliament is growing in power. The monarchy is slightly less important, and it only gets less important from there. Following the Glorious Revolution, you get the Georgian age, and then from the Georgian age, we move into the Victorian era. So, and what I like about the Georgian age is that's when fashion starts to be a thing. So to be fashionable, it almost puts you on, it gives you a certain amount of notoriety. So this is the first time where it's not so much about class. If you can be fashionable and appear to be wealthy, that can give you the illusion of actually having power. That's the first time that happens, is in the Georgian era. Also in the Georgian era is the frequency of prostitution, which seems like a strange thing, you might say, Olivie, like, why are you focusing on a time period in history when prostitution is so enormous? But if you look at it as the sex industry, obviously that is a female-dominated industry, and this is a weird thing to say, to talk about it like, oh yes, female-dominated industry, but, I mean, kind of, yeah. So there was a respectable way to be a prostitute in the Georgian era, and it was to be an occupant of a bawdy house. So there would be a madam, essentially, a bawd, which would be a woman who owned a house, a woman who owned property, which is pretty wild if you think about it. So the average common man in London at the time could expect to make about £50 a year. A bawd could make up to £250 by selling a young girl's virginity. That is, aside from everything else, an enormous amount of money. That would give a woman enough financial freedom that she could own her own house and operate her own business. Whatever you think about the actual business of prostitution, I'm not really going to touch that. I really want to focus on the idea that this was, in a sense, entrepreneurship in women, the first time that this is a really major thing. And the bawds in this time period were often painted as like witches. There was this whole imaginary concept that bawds were like these Baba Yagas who stole innocent girls and forced them into the sex trade. And this was mostly a myth. So usually when women became prostitutes, it was because either poverty, and this was really the only way they could work, or more commonly, they had been destroyed by a man, as in they'd had sex and no longer had any value for marriage, and therefore they had to do something. So they were these fallen women who became prostitutes. So men ruined it once again. Anyway, it's going to be really hard to follow this train of thought. It's already been so long. So moving from this train of thought, immediately after the Georgian era, you get the Victorian age, which is when a lot of the social customs of England and also the South came about. So this kind of idea of the stuffy aristocracy, what's proper or not proper, that wasn't like ancient. That came from the Victorians. That's actually something they say a lot in Downton Abbey. Just saying. So that comes as a direct result of women gaining some financial capacity. There were some women that were wealthier than men, and what follows that is this idea that women should be reserved and apologetic. I have said before that when I was younger, I used to try and live by the phrase, be pretty if you can, be witty if you must, but be gracious if it kills you. That is an extremely Victorian ideal, and it's also insane. Be gracious if it kills you. No man has ever been taught that. And if he's not going to hold himself to that standard, why should I? I am not, you didn't ask me a question, and I definitely didn't answer it. I mostly just rambled on for a really long time to explain to you that this is something that has been internalized for centuries. And it's kind of time we get rid of it. I saw the t-shirts that were made after the whole Chrissy Teigen Trump thing, that the t-shirts that say filthy mouthed wife or foul-mouthed wife, one or the other, and I was like, I really want t-shirts or buttons or something that just say not a nice girl. I'm tired of being a nice girl. What is the point? What is the point of being nice? I don't know. I really don't know anymore. I mean, not getting killed, I guess, but if those are my alternatives, it seems like there's something wrong, like something much bigger is wrong. So, anyway, if you guys would have any interest in like random merch, I know this is crazy, but I have 3 main ideas if you would be interested in this at all. But buttons that say not a nice girl, because I just want one. Buttons for S.P.E.L.L that just have the logo with the bee on it and the wreath and the crown. And then if we could get Lil Kimura to collaborate on this to create buttons for the Unapologetic Ladies Club, these are things that I want to do with myself, with my life. So yeah, I don't have anything helpful to say to you except that like I am also mad. But sometimes that's enough. I hope that's enough. You're mad, I'm mad. That's what we got. So I'm already running out of time, so I'm going to save 2 of the questions. I'll tell you what they are though, so that you know that I will answer them. So someone has asked me to get a better understanding about Theo and Draco and how I write them, specifically the Theo from Lethal Combination. So that's something I will talk about. Someone also asked me about my favorite bands. That might actually be easier to just list for you in written form. They also told me that I would appreciate The Man by Taylor Swift, so I think they're maybe not up to date on their videos because I have mentioned it. I do love that song. I've also talked enough about that, so moving on. So now a bunch of rapid-fire writing questions. I'm going to answer them pretty quickly because I've answered them before, but my writing practices change from project to project, so might as well revisit them. Do you have a daily minimum word or page count that you must complete for the day to be a successful writing day? Yes, I do, but it's not like, I think Stephen King writes 1,000 words a day or something. It's not like that. I give myself something that needs to get done each day and I need to accomplish that, but it is based on, I wouldn't recommend this if you're just starting writing because you're going to frustrate yourself really fast. So I base my writing expected word counts on what I could expect to get done based on what I think my productivity will be. So I make my checklist every Monday and I kind of assume I'm most productive in the first half of the week. I'm most productive in the mornings. That's how I determine how much I think I can get done. Also, do I have my period this week? Sometimes that is going to inhibit my productivity, so I factor that stuff in. That's something you can't really know until you've been doing it for a while. You want to keep your expectations manageable because as good as it feels to cross something off a list, not crossing something off a list and getting backed up and feeling like you're letting yourself down is really not a great thing for your creative process. Set manageable expectations. So you might, if you're just starting, you might want to just say, write something every day. If that happens to be only a sentence someday, at least some days and some not, at least you've still done something. And you can feel good about that. So once you've accomplished the thing you told yourself you were going to do, enjoy it. You're allowed to reward yourself for having done what you said you were going to get done. How do you balance writing original fiction with writing fan fiction? I mean, okay, so this is really dependent on what your goals are. For me, I have had to reconfigure the time that I spend on fan fiction versus original fiction because I need to pay my rent. So I've had to limit myself. There's a lot of fan fiction projects I wanted to get to, and then it has just not been a responsible use of my time. So right now, I only write on Mondays and Tuesdays for fan fiction, and everything else is devoted to a variety of original fiction projects. But your balance, that would be dependent on what you wanted to accomplish. If you have a lot of fan fiction ideas, then obviously that's where you spend your time. How does reviewing, editing, and proofreading fit into your writing schedule? Oh, I spend the majority of my time, I think, maybe half, maybe 60% of my time is spent editing versus writing. For me, the first draft, not very long. If you take my fan fiction chapters, I write the whole thing on Monday, and then I put it away for a while, and then I edit it on Tuesday, and it takes me exactly as much time to edit it 3 times as it does to write the entire first draft. My second draft is always the longest, so when I'm reading the first draft and refining it, that is what takes me the most time. And then I definitely spend at least 2 or 3 days during the week actively writing something, new material, and then all the rest of the time is devoted to revision. I revise everything at least 3 times. If I'm sending it to someone to read for world building, I will usually send them the second draft. If I'm sending it to someone for like beta corrections, spelling and punctuation, I will send them the 3rd or 4th draft. Do you work on one original and one fan fiction story at a time, or do you cycle through several projects? Part of the way that I think my brain works is that I need to have a lot of things going on, because an idea for one thing will spark an idea for the other thing. So my work is actually better if I have multiple projects. I think if you need to focus on something, and occasionally I do have to focus on one thing because it has to get done or whatever, then yes, I will devote most of my time to that thing. But I never do just one project at a time. I try to have 2 or more very different projects, because having something sort of on the back burner usually will inspire me for whatever is on the front burner. So right now I'm writing The Atlas 6, which it's an ensemble story that's mostly a comedy, but it's got a lot of a particular kind of characters. It's a lot like How to Win Friends and Influence People. So the other project that I would want to have with it, what I do, is a very intimate, only 2 people romance. So I just try to, and I try to set in different time periods, different worlds, so that when I figure out something for one project, it can unlock a door in another one. Do I write every single day, or do I allow myself regular days off? So I determine this at the start of the week, whether I need to take a day off and what day I might best be able to do it. Do a lot of planning ahead, but that's my personality. I think if you're the kind of person who can be a little bit more spontaneous, then you should do that. Definitely, I have to force myself to take days off. I love the grind. I hate the hustle. But I do love that, like, I love the feeling of working and being productive. So I actually have to force myself to take days off, or I won't. But, I get tired, and I try to be aware of when I'm tired, or when my bucket is a little empty, my bucket of creativity is a little bit empty. I have bipolar, so when I am depressed, I have to cut myself a little more slack. And that's something that I have had to teach myself how to do. Does not come naturally to me. So I kind of play it by ear in a sense. But in terms of trends, I do essentially write every day. One of their biggest obstacles to writing is a crippling sense of inadequacy. How do I deal with my own writing-related insecurities? Good God. I try not to think about it. That's just the truth. There are thought exercises that I cannot touch, because they would be like a hand grenade to my ability to produce anything. I've said before that I have it's gotten to the point with fanfiction that I've had to filter out my reviews so that they go into a folder and I can only check them when I'm in like an okay headspace, because sometimes it can derail me for a whole day. I have a really hard time getting back into what I was working on because someone says something that frustrates me, or that discourages me, that depresses me from time to time. So there is a lot of managing what I can think about and what I can't. One of the things I can't think about is, am I bad at this? That's something I just don't ask myself. I just continually tell myself, this is important. I'm working as hard as I possibly can. I have taken everything but luck off the table. I work extremely hard. I try to work intelligently. I improve as much as I can in areas that I have targeted to improve. So just make sure that your expectations for yourself aren't, today I'm going to create genius, because it's not going to happen that way. You might say, today I'm going to figure out what is wrong with the dialogue in this scene. There's something about this scene that isn't working, and today I'm going to think about how I can unlock that. And then you fix that problem. You have to focus on the little things that you can fix. Never expect genius out of your first draft. That's just another complete sidebar. Just don't think that what's in your head is going to end up on paper automatically, or that it should. Don't be afraid of editing. If that first draft is a mess, you can get it there. You can build it. If you can't build it right away, you can get there. You practice in order to be able to get to whatever your expectations for yourself are. It becomes easier the more you do it, just like any ability. You're training for the ability to create the art you want to create. Don't think that you will ever wake up one day and just write the perfect book. It's really not going to happen. It doesn't happen to professional writers. Make sure that your expectations for yourself are that you are doing the best you can within expectations that you are setting at not just a reasonable level, but things that help you move forward. Being able to check things off a list is meaningful to me. So knowing that you are producing things, allow yourself to take encouragement from that. Even if you're not happy with what you've produced yet, you produced something, which means that you can turn that something into something good. Be patient with yourself. Create because you have a story you want to tell. Focus on telling that story, and then focus on telling that story well, telling it truthfully, with integrity, telling the story you want to tell in the truest way you want to tell it, with the most finesse that you can, and acknowledge that you might be able to tell a better version of that story later, and give yourself the freedom to do that. What is my outlining and planning process like? I don't really outline. I used to not outline at all because I would try and then it would just get derailed, and then I would lose time, sort of, because something would happen that wasn't on my outline, and then my whole outline was worthless. And also, sometimes I personally think that there are a lot of people who use story prepping as a procrastination tool. So I try to avoid, I'm going to outline today and that's all my work for today, because I could get a lot more done if I just sat down and started writing. But the problem with me is I tend to write stories that are too long, or they become too complex because I haven't thought of things in advance. I haven't sat down and thought, how am I going to work this out? How to Win is over 400,000 words, and The Commoner's Guide is, I think, over 500,000. How did they get that long? Because I didn't outline anything at all. I knew sort of what I wanted to happen, and then everything sort of solved itself along the way. But obviously, fan fiction is written in installments, so from week to week, I'd be like, today I feel like writing this, I'd write that. Which is how those stories ended up so long. That's obviously not the best way to do things. I had fun, though. I had a lot of fun writing How to Win and The Commoner's Guide. For me, it was playing in a world and playing with characters, and I enjoyed it. But if you're trying to write a book, you don't want to accidentally write 500,000 words of book, because it's too much book. So I have lately started outlining, and the way that I do this is now I have broken down, so the Atlas 6 I have broken down into, I want to say, 8 parts. I have determined where major events should happen, and that's all the outlining I've done. And then each time I begin a new part, I break that down further by what's happening to each character. So it's kind of a living outline that as I go, I am contributing more to it. And that is helping me not get carried away, basically, because that's a problem that I have. But I think if you're the kind of writer who has trouble getting started, I wouldn't worry so much about the outline. I would just start, because you'll get there. The thing is, I used to write normal amounts. My chapters used to be, 2,000, 3,000 words, 4,000 words at the max. And now it's very easy for me to accidentally write a 12,000 word chapter. So that's not awesome. I mean, maybe it is to people who are consuming it, I hope, because it happens. But it's not awesome for me as a writer in terms of conserving my energy and my time. So how do I answer this question? Did I answer this question? I'm still learning how to outline well, basically. I'm definitely I'm a pantser, I think is what they call it. I don't plan a whole lot. I used to plan almost nothing, but now I'm reformed just enough to keep my word counts reasonable. Okay, well, I have gone on for a really long time. So like I said, we will talk about Theo next week, which is going to be interesting because there's a lot to Theo in terms of how I have crafted him. Also because he's the character who's most consistent from story to story, because he is essentially mine. So it's an interesting question. And then we'll talk about music as well. You can also look at my website, because that's where I list what I'm currently listening to. Or you can look at my Spotify where you can see the kind of bands I put on my playlist usually. That's enough for now, I think. You're welcome. Starting your week off with some feminist rage. Please don't tell the church. Mr. Blake already knows, so he seems fine. He seems fine with it. Actually, ever since Mr. Blake became a teacher, he's become much more of a feminist. He told me this story. Okay, I'll tell this one story and then we're done. So he's a physics teacher. He has a bunch of lab tables. And I don't know why we were talking about this. I think he was trying to tell me about what periods are like. This is what I mean. If you don't alert people that you're in terrible pain, they might just not notice that that's something that you go through. It's crazy. But anyway, so he told me that there was a girl who was like under the lab table. She was just under the table. So he went under the table as well. He like crawled under there to be like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? And she, I guess, explained to him that she had cramps, menstrual things, the usual menstrual things. And he was like, yeah, so I learned that when they go under the table like that, you just shouldn't bother them. And I was like, this is such an incredible story on so many levels. I don't even know where to start with this story. He's got sisters. He's got a mother. He's got a wife. You'd think he'd know this, but anyway. And before I forget, you can catch me as a guest on the Daily Witch podcast for September 22nd, which is yesterday from this video being posted. Tanya, who is my editor at Witchway Magazine, had me as a guest to talk about creativity, kind of a lot of what we talked about today, but in less detail and in more terms of what to do to inspire the muse, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, you can find that. The Daily Witch is available on Podbean, Spotify, and Apple, I think. I'll confirm. There'll be a link below. This has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.